The masked orderly lunged, scalpel flashing. I had one syringe of sedative and a heartbeat to react. If I missed, my patient's life was just another lost bet in their sick game. The needle found flesh. His body hit the tile. But the keycard in his pocket showed me the truth. Someone I trusted was already betting against my patient's survival. The overhead LEDs hummed, a sterile drone vibrating through Julian Sterling's temples. He eased the microforceps into the patient's chest cavity, the metallic scent of cauterized flesh clinging to his surgical mask. Sweat pooled at the small of his spine, a cold trickle that felt like a needle sliding down his vertebrae. To his left, the vital monitor beeped a rhythmic, reassuring pulse, but Julian's focus flickered toward the peripheral shadow of the equipment rack. A pinhole lens, masked by a tangle of fiber-optic cables, stared back with a dull, glass eye. It was almost invisible, a speck of obsidian tucked behind the hum of the heart-lung machine. Julian knew it was there because he had spent the last 3 months learning the geometry of his own surveillance. "Suction," Julian muttered. His voice was a dry rasp behind the blue paper of his mask. The scrub nurse moved instantly, the plastic tips slurping excess fluid from the pericardium with a wet, rhythmic sound. Julian's hands remained steady, though his pulse hammered against his latex gloves. He was a man of rituals. The triple scrub, the exact alignment of his tools, the way he breathed in sets of 4. These were the only things keeping the walls from closing in. On the other side of that lens, miles away in a basement smelling of stale smoke and damp concrete, the Red Line syndicate watched his every tremor. They weren't admiring the delicate valve repair. They were calculating the odds. This patient was a high-stakes play, a local developer with a heart like a rotted house. The syndicate had turned Julian's operating theater into a Roman Colosseum, broadcasting the intimate struggle of life and death to a darknet audience of gamblers who bet on whether a man would wake up or bleed out on the table. "Pressure is dipping, doctor," the anesthesiologist, Sarah Miller, said. Her voice was flat, a monotone that lacked the urgency a dropping blood pressure usually commanded. She didn't look at Julian. She looked at the ceiling, her eyes fixed on a point far above the carnage. "I see it. Adjust the flow. I'm almost through the suture line." Julian looped the Prolene thread, his movements precise and practiced. Each stitch served as a digital signature. As he pulled the knot tight, a tiny green light on the hidden camera flashed once. A signal. The broadcast was successful. Somewhere in the city's financial district, a server farm blinked out of existence, breached via the very connection Julian provided under the guise of a miracle. He had saved a grandfather's heart, but the cost was already cascading through the city's grid. He trimmed the excess thread, the snip of the scissors sounding like a gunshot in the silent room. The surgery ended with the mechanical efficiency Julian demanded of himself, but the weight in his chest didn't lift. He stepped away from the table, his shoulders aching under the lead-lined apron. He needed to wash. He needed to scrub the feeling of being watched off his skin. He pushed through the heavy swinging doors into the scrub room. The air here was cooler, smelling of industrial soap and the sharp, ozone tang of the sterilization units. Julian walked to the sink, his movements automatic. He depressed the foot pedal, and a stream of lukewarm water hissed into the stainless steel basin. Shuck, shuck, shuck. He grabbed the plastic-bristled brush and began the first scrub. Up to the elbows. Circular motions. He counted the strokes in his head. 1, 2, 3. He thought of the patient he had lost years ago, the one whose death had been a result of a mentor's haste. That ghost lived in the soap bubbles. A shadow moved in the reflection of the cracked mirror above the sink. Julian didn't turn immediately. He watched the shape coalesce in the glass. It was a man in an orderly's uniform, but the proportions were wrong. The neck was too thick, the posture too rigid. The man wore a surgical mask that hid everything but a pair of cold, dead eyes. In his hand, he swung a heavy, green oxygen canister like a mace. The first blow whistled past Julian's ear, slamming into the tiled wall with a crack that sent ceramic shards flying. The sound echoed like a bell in the narrow corridor. Julian didn't scream. He didn't have the breath for it. He spun, his wet hands slipping on the edge of the sink. The enforcer lunged again, the metal tank raised high. Julian's mind, trained for crisis, shifted into a different kind of surgery. He saw the man not as a threat, but as a series of pressure points and mechanical failures. As the canister descended, Julian stepped inside the arc of the swing. The cold metal brushed his shoulder, but he was already moving. His hand darted into the pocket of his lab coat, fingers closing around a syringe he had palmed earlier. A heavy dose of a fast-acting sedative he'd kept for a moment just like this. The enforcer roared, a muffled sound behind the mask, and tried to grapple him. Julian felt the man's immense strength, a crushing pressure against his ribs that smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap cologne. He shoved the needle into the side of the man's neck, right above the collarbone, and depressed the plunger with a thumb of iron. The struggle lasted only seconds longer. The enforcer's grip slackened. The oxygen tank hit the floor with a deafening thud, rolling lazily across the linoleum. The man slumped against Julian, a dead weight that smelled of sweat and fear, before sliding down to the floor. Julian stood over him, gasping for air. His hands were shaking now, the adrenaline leaching out of his system. He looked at the unconscious man, then at the door. No one had come. The hospital was a labyrinth of silence at this hour. He knelt, his fingers searching the enforcer's pockets. He found a wallet, a pack of gum, and then, tucked into a hidden seam of the scrub top, a black plastic card. It had no markings, no magnetic strip, just a small, embedded chip that glinted under the fluorescent lights. A key card. Julian tucked it into his waistband, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He had proof now. This wasn't just a digital ghost. It was a physical breach. The hospital's security had been handed over to the monsters. He didn't stay to see the man wake up. He stripped off his blood-spattered gown, threw it into the biohazard bin, and headed for the exit. He needed to see Marcus. The drive to the outskirts of the city took 40 minutes. Julian kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, watching for the sweep of headlights that stayed too long or the silhouette of a car that didn't belong. The rain began to fall, a miserable gray drizzle that blurred the neon signs of the diners and gas stations. Marcus Reed lived in a basement apartment that felt more like a submarine than a home. The air was thick with the smell of scorched dust and the hum of high-powered cooling fans. Cables snaked across the floor like black vines, and the only light came from a wall of monitors that cast a flickering, ghostly blue glow over everything. Marcus was hunched over a keyboard, his fingers moving in a blur. He didn't look up when Julian entered. He just pointed to a stool. "You look like hell, Doc," Marcus said. His voice was thin, a reclusive rasp. "I was attacked. In the scrub room." Julian pulled the black keycard from his pocket and set it on the cluttered desk. "I found this on him." Marcus stopped typing. He picked up the card with the tips of his fingers, holding it up to the monitor light. "This isn't a standard hospital badge. This is a high-frequency bypass. It's a skeleton key for the entire network. Whoever had this could walk through any digital door in the building without leaving a footprint." "Can you trace it?" Julian asked, leaning in. The smell of Marcus's unwashed hoodies and old coffee was a strange comfort compared to the metallic scent of the OR. "I can try to see where it's been talking," Marcus muttered. He slotted the card into a reader. The monitors erupted into a cascade of scrolling text, lines of code and data packets that meant nothing to Julian, but seemed to be a map to Marcus. Julian watched the screen, his mind racing. He thought of the patients, the gambling, the hidden cameras. He thought of his daughter, Chloe, sleeping at home, unaware that her father was wading into a sewer. "Okay," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. "I'm in the card's history. It's been used to access the surgical wing's internal router every night for a month. But there's something else. A ledger, a list of transactions." Julian felt a cold prickle of dread. "Show me." Marcus tapped a final key. A spreadsheet appeared on the screen. It was a list of names, dates, and dollar amounts. The numbers were staggering: 50,000, 100,000, $500,000. "These are bets," Marcus whispered. "But look at the account names. They aren't anonymous." Julian leaned closer, his eyes scanning the names. He expected to see Vance. He expected to see the names of the city's underworld. But the name at the top of the list hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. Miller S. Sarah. Julian breathed the name out, the air leaving his lungs in a rush. Subverted beat 1.4. Julian stared at the screen, his mind rejecting the evidence even as his eyes confirmed it. Sarah Miller, his head of anesthesiology, his partner in the OR for 6 years. She was the one who kept his patients under, the one who monitored the thin line between sleep and the abyss. "It has to be a mistake, Marcus. Someone used her credentials." Julian's voice was firm, the voice he used when a resident suggested the wrong dosage. He knew Sarah. She was meticulous, perhaps a bit cold. But she lived for the science of her craft. She had a daughter in college. She volunteered at the free clinic. "Doc, it's not just a login," Marcus said, his voice hesitant. "The bank accounts are tied to her home address. The transfers are coming from a private terminal inside her house. Look at the timing of the bets." Marcus pulled up a side-by-side comparison. On the left, the start times of Julian's most difficult surgeries. On the right, the timestamps of the largest against bets. They matched perfectly. Every time Julian stepped up to save a life, Sarah was betting that he would fail. Julian felt a wave of relief wash over him, a strange, twisted kind of hope. Wait, look at the amounts. They're too consistent. If she were just a gambler, she'd be erratic. This looks like she's being forced to balance the books. Maybe she's working undercover? Maybe she's trying to track the money from the inside. It made sense. Sarah was smart. She was brave. She had seen the same corruption he had. She was probably doing exactly what he was doing, just from a different angle. He felt a surge of warmth for her. He wasn't alone in this. They were a team. "We need to go to her," Julian said, standing up. "If we pool what we have, we can take this to the board. We can stop this tonight." "I don't know, Julian," Marcus cautioned. But Julian was already at the door. He felt lighter than he had in weeks. The betrayal wasn't a betrayal. It was an alliance he hadn't realized existed. He drove to Sarah's house, a modest colonial on a quiet, tree-lined street. The lights were on in the kitchen. He knocked on the door, his heart full of a desperate, optimistic energy. Sarah opened the door. She was wearing a thick sweater and holding a mug of tea. She looked tired, her face a mask of professional neutrality. "Julian, what are you doing here?" "I know, Sarah," he said, stepping inside before she could protest. "I saw the ledger. I know about the bets. I know you're trying to track the red line." Sarah froze. The steam from her tea rose in a slow, twisting ribbon. She didn't look relieved. She didn't look like a comrade in arms. She looked hollow. "Julian," she said softly, "you shouldn't have come here." "We have the key card." Julian pushed on, his words tumbling out. "Marcus is tracing the server. With your records of the transactions, we can prove Vance is behind the whole thing. We can end it." Sarah set her tea down on the entry table. Her hand was perfectly steady. "I'm not tracking them, Julian." Julian paused. The warmth in his chest began to flicker. "What?" "I'm not tracking them," she repeated. She looked him directly in the eyes, and for the first time, he saw the greed there. Cold, hard, and sharp as a diamond. "I'm the one who ensures the outcomes. Do you have any idea how easy it is to nudge a patient's heart rate? A little too much of this, a little less of that. You're a great surgeon, Julian, but you're just the entertainment. I'm the one who decides who wins the bet." The world tilted. The smell of her lavender-scented candles suddenly felt cloying, like the smell of a funeral home. You've been killing them," Julian whispered. "I've been managing them," she corrected. "And I've made $3 million in 18 months. Do you know what the hospital pays me? Peanuts. My daughter is at Yale, my mortgage is gone, and you just handed me the one person who could have stopped me." She stepped back, and Julian heard the click of a door behind him. He turned to see two men, the same kind of heavy-set shadows he had seen in the scrub room, stepping out of her living room. Julian realized with a sickening jolt that he hadn't found an ally. He had walked into the lion's den and handed over his only map. He wasn't the hero saving the day. He was the loose end that had just tied itself into a noose. "Take him to the garage," Sarah said, her voice as clinical as if she were ordering a dosage of morphine. "And find that key card." Julian lunged for the door, but the men were faster. A heavy hand slammed into his chest, throwing him back against the wall. The last thing he saw before the world went black was Sarah picking up her tea and taking a calm, measured sip. The headache was a rhythmic pounding, a drumbeat of agony that synced with the flickering fluorescent light overhead. Julian opened his eyes to find himself in the executive suite of Arthur Vance. The room was a fortress of mahogany and leather. A massive portrait of the hospital's founder stared down from the wall, its painted eyes seeming to track Julian's every agonizing breath. On the desk sat a crystal decanter filled with murky, greenish pond water. A bizarre, silent threat that no one ever mentioned. Arthur Vance stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Julian's car, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He didn't turn around when Julian groaned. "We have a problem of optics, Julian," Vance said. His voice was melodic, a practiced silkiness that made Julian's skin crawl. "A surgeon who asks too many questions is like a scalpel with a jagged edge. It tears rather than cuts. And we prefer clean lines here." Vance turned, his face a mask of disappointment. He walked to the desk and slid a single sheet of paper toward Julian. "This is a liability waiver. It states that you are aware of certain unavoidable equipment fluctuations in the OR, and that you accept full responsibility for any patient outcomes related to them. Sign it." Julian pushed himself up in the leather chair. His ribs screamed in protest. "I'm not signing anything. I know about the red line. I know about Sarah." Vance smiled, a thin, predatory expression. "Sarah is a pragmatist. She understands that the hospital is a business, not a cathedral. We provide a service. We provide excitement. And in return, we ensure the lights stay on. You, however, seem to have a romanticized view of our profession." Vance leaned in, his hand gripping the edge of the desk. "You have 24 hours to sign that paper, Julian. If you don't, the equipment fluctuations will become catastrophic. And I don't just mean for the patients." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Julian was escorted out of the office by a security guard who looked more like a hitman. He didn't go home. He went to his private office in the surgical wing, needing a moment of silence to think. The door was unlocked. Julian stepped inside, the smell of his own stale coffee and old books greeting him. He reached for the light switch, and the room was flooded with the harsh glare of the overheads. He froze. His desk had been cleared. His books were scattered on the floor. But it was the photograph on the center of the desk that stopped his heart. It was a picture of Chloe, taken last summer at the lake. She was laughing, her hair a wild tangle of blonde. A surgical scalpel had been driven through the center of the photo, pinning it to the wood. The blade had passed right through Chloe's chest. Julian reached out, his hand trembling. He touched the cold steel of the handle. It was a message, clear and unmistakable. The syndicate wasn't just watching him in the OR anymore. They were in his life. They were in his home. The ritual failed him. He didn't scrub his hands. He didn't count his breaths. He simply sat in the chair and wept. The sound of his sobs muffled by the heavy, soundproofed walls of the hospital. He had to fight back. But how do you fight a ghost that has its hands around your daughter's throat? The next morning, the hospital felt different. Every hallway was a gauntlet, every passing face a potential threat. Julian moved through the corridors like a ghost, his eyes darting to the corners of the ceiling, searching for the glint of lenses. He was scheduled for an emergency gallbladder removal, a routine procedure, the kind he could do in his sleep. He went to the supply room to gather his kit. He liked to pack his own bag, a habit born of his obsessive need for order. He grabbed his leather medical bag and opened it on the stainless steel counter. The smell hit him first, a sharp, acidic tang that burned the back of his throat. He looked down and gasped. The bag was filled with white, crystalline granules. Salt. But not just salt. It was mixed with a corrosive cleaning agent that was already eating away at the delicate instruments. His surgical scissors were pitted and blackened. The vials of local anesthetic had been shattered, their contents mingling with the salt to create a toxic, slushy mess. The syndicate wasn't just threatening him. They were sabotaging his ability to heal. They were turning his own tools into weapons against him. "Is there a problem, Dr. Sterling?" Julian spun around. A young orderly was standing in the doorway, leaning against a mop bucket. He was whistling a low, gravelly tune, a funeral dirge that Julian recognized from the dark corners of the hospital. "Get out," Julian hissed. The orderly grinned, a slow, yellow-toothed expression. "Just checking on the inventory, Doc. Looks like you're running low on the essentials." Julian grabbed the bag and shoved past the man, his mind racing. He needed replacements. He needed to get to the OR. But more than that, he needed to get out of the building. He headed for the parking garage, his boots echoing on the concrete. The garage was a cathedral of gray pillars and deep shadows, the air damp and smelling of exhaust. He reached his car, a silver sedan that looked small and vulnerable in the vast space. He unlocked the door, but before he could slide inside, the roar of an engine shattered the silence. A black SUV, its windows tinted to an impenetrable obsidian, accelerated from the far end of the level. It didn't swerve. It didn't slow down. It was a 3-ton bullet aimed directly at him. Julian dived, He rolled across the concrete, the rough surface tearing at his suit and skin. The SUV slammed into his car with a scream of twisting metal and shattering glass. The force of the impact shoved the sedan 3 feet across the floor. The SUV reversed, its tires shrieking. It was positioning itself for another run. Julian scrambled to his feet, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He couldn't get back to his car. He couldn't get to the stairs. The only thing close was the service elevator, a heavy industrial lift used for moving laundry and waste. He lunged for the button, his fingers frantic. The doors groaned open with agonizing slowness. Behind him, the SUV roared again, the sound vibrating in his chest. He threw himself into the elevator just as the SUV surged forward. The heavy metal doors clanged shut a split second before the vehicle hit. The entire elevator car shuddered, the cables groaning under the strain, but the doors held. Julian collapsed onto the floor, the smell of grease and dirty linens filling his lungs. He was alive, but he was trapped in a box, and the men outside weren't going to stop until he was dead. He pulled out his phone. He had one person left. "Marcus," he wheezed when the call connected. "They tried to kill me. In the garage." "I know." Marcus's voice sounded frantic. "Julian, I found something. I've been digging into Sarah's files. She's not the architect. She's a victim." "A victim?" Julian scoffed, thinking of the cold greed in her eyes. "She told me she's made $3 million. She's being blackmailed, Julian. Vance has her son's gambling debts. He's holding them over her. But that's not the big news. I found the server. I know where the house is." "Where?" "It's in the hospital, Julian. The executive suite. Vance isn't just the CEO. He's the bookie. He's the one running the entire red line from his own office." Julian looked at the elevator's floor indicator. It was rising. He wasn't going to the basement. He was going up, to the executive suite. The elevator doors opened into a maintenance corridor behind the main offices. Julian stepped out, his body aching, his mind focused with a sharp, cold clarity. He didn't have his tools, he didn't have his rituals, but he had the truth. He moved through the shadows, avoiding the security cameras he now knew were his enemies. He reached the back door of Vance's suite. It was locked, but Julian knew the hospital's mechanical bypass codes, the ones used by the fire department. He punched in the sequence. The lock clicked. He stepped inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from the city skyline through the massive windows. Vance was sitting at his desk, the glow of a tablet illuminating his face. "You're late, Julian," Vance said without looking up. "The liability waiver is still unsigned." "I'm not here to sign your paper, Arthur." Vance looked up, and for the first time, the mask of civility slipped. His eyes were cold, calculating. He tapped a button on the tablet and turned it toward Julian. "Then perhaps you'd like to watch a movie." The screen showed a live feed. It was a playground. Julian recognized the oak tree, the red slide. It was Chloe's school. A man in a long gray coat was standing by the fence, his eyes fixed on a small girl in a blue jacket. "Chloe." "His name is Murphy," Vance said softly. "He's a very patient man, but he doesn't like to be kept waiting. If I don't send him a specific code in the next 10 minutes, he'll take your daughter for a walk, and you'll never see her again." Julian felt the world dissolve. The mahogany, the leather, the smell of expensive scotch. It all became a blur. There was only the screen. Only his daughter. "What do you want?" Julian's voice was a ghost of itself. "Senator Robert Hayes is coming in for heart surgery tomorrow," Vance said, his voice returning to its melodic, professional tone. "He's a powerful man, Julian. a man who wants to regulate our industry. His death would be very profitable for the syndicate. The odds against him surviving are currently 10-1. Vance leaned across the desk, his face inches from Julian's. You are going to ensure those odds are met. You are going to kill the senator on the operating table. An accident. A tragic, unavoidable complication. You do that and Murphy walks away. Chloe comes home. Julian looked at the screen. Chloe was laughing, chasing a ball. She had no idea that a monster was 10 feet away, waiting for a signal to end her life. I can't, Julian whispered. You can, Vance countered. You're the best surgeon in the state. You know exactly where to cut to make it look like a mistake. And if you don't, well, I've always found that the loss of a child is a much harder wound to heal than a professional reputation. The physical confrontation happened before Julian could think. He lunged across the desk, his hands closing around Vance's throat. He wasn't a doctor in that moment. He was a father, a predator protecting his cub. Vance was older, but he was strong, fueled by a lifetime of arrogance. He slammed a fist into Julian's ribs, the air exploding from Julian's lungs. He grabbed Julian's hair and slammed his head into the mahogany desk. The world spun. Julian felt the warm flow of blood down his forehead. Vance pinned him against the floor-to-ceiling window, the city lights a dizzying backdrop to the violence. You are nothing, Julian, Vance hissed, his face contorted with rage. You are a tool, a scalpel, and if you don't work, I'll break you and find another. He threw Julian back toward the desk. Julian staggered, his hand catching on the edge of the crystal decanter. He looked down and saw a small, black phone, a burner, sitting next to the tablet. In one fluid motion, Julian snatched the phone and shoved it into his pocket. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the pain in his side. I'll do it, Julian gasped, backing toward the door. I'll kill the senator, just leave her alone. Vance straightened his tie, his breathing heavy. He smoothed his hair, the mask of the CEO returning. Good. The surgery is at 8 a.m. Don't be late, doctor. The world is watching. Julian fled the office, his heart a frantic bird in a cage. He reached the maintenance area where Marcus was waiting, hidden among the pipes and wires. I got it, Julian whispered, pulling out the burner phone. The evidence. This is his private line. It has to have the codes, the contacts. It's the smoking gun. Marcus took the phone, his fingers trembling with excitement. This is it, Julian. This is how we take him down. If I can dump the data, we can send it to the police, the feds, everyone. He plugged the burner into his laptop. Julian watched the progress bar, his hope rising with every percentage point. This was the play. This was the miracle. Subverted beat 3.6. The progress bar hit 100%. Marcus let out a triumphant yell. I'm in. I'm in. The file structure is opening. Wait, what is this? Julian leaned in. Instead of a list of contacts or encrypted messages, the screen was filling with a single, repeating icon. A red line. A literal red line that was moving across the screen like a pulse on a heart monitor. Marcus? It's not downloading, Marcus whispered, his face turning ashen in the blue light of the monitor. It's uploading. The laptop's cooling fans began to scream, a high-pitched whine that sounded like a dying animal. The screen flickered, and then a window popped up. External access granted. Synchronizing log. He knew. Julian breathed. He knew I'd take it. Julian, look at the files. Marcus's fingers flew across the keys, but he was locked out. It's not just a virus. It's a frame job. It's moving all of the Red Line's administrative logs into your private cloud account. It's forging timestamps. It's making it look like you've been the one running the server for the last 2 years. The screen flashed red. Upload complete. A new window appeared. A video file. Julian clicked it. It was Vance. He was sitting in his office, looking directly into the camera. "Hello, Julian. I assumed you'd try something clever. Doctors always think they're the smartest people in the room. But I've spent 30 years learning how to bury people in paperwork." Vance smiled. "By the time the police look at your computer, they'll find proof that you created the Red Line to pay off your own surgical errors. They'll find the bank accounts I've opened in your name. They'll find the messages you sent to Sarah Miller, threatening her. You aren't the hero, Julian. You're the mastermind. And tomorrow morning, you're going to prove it by performing your final act of negligence on Senator Hayes." The laptop screen went black. The smell of scorched plastic filled the air as the hardware fried itself from the inside out. Julian sat in the dark, the silence of the maintenance room pressing in on him. He had tried to be smart. He had tried to play the game. And in doing so, he had handed Vance the perfect weapon to destroy him. He was no longer just a surgeon under pressure. He was a man framed for the very crimes he was trying to stop. With his daughter's life as the stakes for a murder he was being forced to commit. The ritual was dead. The sequence was broken. And tomorrow, at 8 a.m., the world would watch him become a killer. The operating room was a cathedral of ice. The stainless steel surfaces gleamed under the shadowless lights, and the air was so cold it felt like inhaling needles. Senator Robert Hayes lay on the table, a mountain of a man, reduced to a landscape of pale skin and blue veins. Julian stood at the head of the table, his hands encased in latex, his face a mask of stone. He could feel the hidden cameras. He could feel Vance watching from the observation gallery, a predatory shadow behind the glass. Sarah Miller was at the anesthesia station. She didn't look at him. Her hands moved with a mechanical, joyless efficiency, adjusting the dials on the gas manifold. "Patient is under," Sarah said. Her voice was a flat line. Julian picked up the scalpel. The weight of it felt wrong, too heavy, like a broadsword. He looked at the senator's chest, the target marked in purple ink. He had to do it. He had to kill this man, to save Chloe. But as he touched the blade to the skin, he heard a sound in his earpiece, a tiny, static-filled whisper from Marcus, who was hidden in the hospital's intercom room. "Julian, I'm in the system. I can't stop the virus, but I can open a channel. Give me something, anything." Julian's mind, sharpened by the proximity of death, began to work. He saw the surgery not as a murder, but as a performance. He made the first incision. "The pressure is spiking," Sarah noted, her voice showing the first hint of genuine alarm. "Julian, what are you doing?" "The valve is more damaged than the scans showed," Julian said, his voice loud enough for the hidden microphones to pick up. "I have to bypass the main artery. I'm going in deep." He moved with a frantic, seemingly desperate energy. To the cameras, it looked like a surgeon losing control, a man making a series of catastrophic errors. He nicked a minor vessel, allowing a spray of blood to coat the field. "He's hemorrhaging," Sarah cried out. In the observation gallery, Julian saw Vance lean forward, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The bets were pouring in. The death odds were skyrocketing. But beneath the blood, beneath the chaos, Julian's fingers were moving with a precision he had never achieved before. He wasn't cutting the artery. He was creating a temporary shunt using a piece of surgical tubing he'd hidden in his palm. He was mimicking a disaster, while performing a miracle. "Marcus," Julian whispered, his head bent low over the chest cavity. "Now." Suddenly, the hospital's intercom system erupted. It wasn't a page for a doctor or code blue. It was a voice. Arthur Vance's voice, clear and cold, echoing through every hallway, every ward, every waiting room. "The loss of a child is a much harder wound to heal than a professional reputation. You are going to kill the senator on the operating table. An accident, a tragic, unavoidable complication." The recording Julian had captured on the burner phone, the one Vance thought he had used to frame Julian, was playing on a loop, broadcast to the entire world. In the gallery, Vance froze. He turned toward the intercom speaker, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. The heavy doors of the observation gallery burst open. A team of men in dark jackets with FBI emblazoned on the back swarmed the room. Julian watched through the glass as Vance was tackled to the floor, his expensive suit crumpling under the weight of justice. Sarah Miller looked up from her monitors, her eyes wide with terror. She saw the agents, saw the end of her $3 million dream. She reached for a syringe, her face a mask of desperation. But Julian caught her wrist. "It's over, Sarah," he said softly. He turned back to the senator. The hemorrhage was contained. The shunt was holding. With the calm, rhythmic precision of a man who had finally found his soul, Julian began to repair the damage he had faked. He stitched 1, 2, 3. The vital monitor began to beep a steady, healthy pulse. The senator was going to live. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights and whispered questions. Julian stood outside the hospital, the cold morning air of the city smelling of rain and asphalt. He watched as Vance and Sarah were led away in handcuffs, their faces pale in the dawn light. A black sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in a gray coat stepped out, the cleaner Julian had seen on the tablet. Julian's heart stopped. He reached for a heavy oxygen tank sitting near the ambulance bay, ready to fight. But the man didn't attack. He reached into the back seat and pulled out a small girl in a blue jacket. "Daddy!" Chloe ran to him, her small arms wrapping around his waist. Julian collapsed to his knees, burying his face in her hair. She smelled of sunshine and strawberry shampoo. "I was with Mr. Scott," Chloe chirped, pointing to the man in the gray coat. "He said you were working late and he was my special bodyguard. We had ice cream." The man, Richard Scott, walked over and flashed a badge. "Undercover FBI, Dr. Sterling. We've been tracking the red line for months. When you contacted us through that encrypted tip line 3 weeks ago, we put a detail on your daughter immediately. The video Vance showed you, it was a week old. We've had her safe the whole time." Julian looked at the man, then at his daughter. He had spent his life trying to be a machine, trying to atone for a single moment of silence with a lifetime of clinical perfection. He had thought he had to save the world alone. "Thank you," Julian whispered. 3 months later, the mountains of Vermont were a riot of red and gold. The air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth, a clean, honest scent that didn't need to be scrubbed away. Julian sat on the porch of a small clinic, a cup of lukewarm tea in his hand. Inside, he could hear the rhythmic thump-thump of a ball as Chloe played in the hallway. He didn't check the monitors. He didn't count his breaths. He simply watched the sun dip below the horizon, the light fading into a deep, peaceful purple. He was no longer a surgeon of the red line. He was just a man, healing one person at a time in a world where the only thing that mattered was the steady, quiet beat of a heart that was loved. He took a sip of the tea and smiled. It was perfectly, humanly imperfect. The end.